Okay. Wow. This deep dive is going to get pretty technical today.
Oh, yeah.
You want to know about dose-response relationships
Right.
and receptor binding with cannabinoids? So we're going full-on PhD level today with all the science-y stuff.
Yeah.
CB1,
Okay.
CB2,
Yeah.
GPCRs, the whole 9 yards.
It's going to be a fun one.
Yeah.
It's a really interesting area.
Yeah.
Yeah, when we're talking about cannabinoids, it's really this whole interplay between these molecules and this really complex machinery we have going on in our cells.
So it's not as simple as saying, like, cannabinoid A does X?
No, not really. To
Yeah.
really get into this,
Okay.
I think we need to start with those receptors that you mentioned.
Yeah.
The CB1 and CB2 receptors, they're like gatekeepers on the surfaces of our cells.
Okay, like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And cannabinoids are the keys that fit into those locks.
All right, so why are these receptors so important?
Yeah.
Why are they the target for cannabinoids?
Well, our bodies are always working to be in balance,
Yeah.
trying for homeostasis, and
Yeah.
these receptors are actually part of a larger system,
Yeah.
the endocannabinoid system,
Right.
which is playing a really crucial role in keeping that balance
Wow.
throughout a whole wide range of processes in our bodies,
Yeah.
from our mood and our memory to appetite and pain.
So it's not just about
Yeah,
you're
it's
kinda
much more than
getting
that.
high.
Just getting high.
Yeah, it's keeping everything running.
Exactly. And that's where these cannabinoids come in. They're like
Ah.
these signals from
Oh.
outside that can actually kind of nudge
Mhm.
that endocannabinoid system in all sorts of different directions,
Yep.
depending on which receptors they hit and in what concentration.
So it's not just about if it binds,
Yeah.
but how much of it binds.
It's how much.
That's where dose response comes in.
Exactly.
Oh,
That's
wow.
exactly where dose response comes in.
Okay.
Let's look at CB1 receptors, for example.
Okay.
They are all over the brain, concentrated there
Uh-huh.
in areas that have to do with mood, memory, and how we think.
Okay.
So imagine you introduce just a little bit of a cannabinoid
Yeah.
that activates CB1.
Like hypothetically a tiny puff.
Sure, at a low dose, like you might experience some subtle effects.
Okay.
Maybe a slight mood change or just a little bit of relaxation.
Okay.
But when you increase that dose,
Uh-huh.
those same CB1 receptors can trigger much stronger effects.
Wow.
Maybe even euphoria changes in perception or anxiety,
Really?
depending on the person and the specific cannabinoid.
So like turning up the volume on a radio, higher dose, stronger signal.
It's a good analogy,
Yeah.
but it's not always linear.
Oh, okay.
And that's where the signaling pathways come in.
Oh, okay.
Remember those GPCR?
Yes, those are like the molecular switches on
Right.
the cell surface.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Both CB1 and CB2 are members of that family.
Okay.
When a cannabinoid binds to its receptor, it flips that switch. It
Yeah.
triggers all these events inside the cell.
Got it.
And one of the really important molecules in this is CANMP,
Okay.
cyclic AMP.
Right. Canopy.
Uh-huh.
It's like a second messenger.
Isn't that involved in a bunch of different cellular processes?
It is.
Yeah.
It takes the signal from the activated receptor
Okay.
to other parts of the cell.
Wow.
And this is where that dose-response relationship gets really interesting.
Okay.
Different doses can actually change CAMP levels in different ways.
So I thought it was like more cannabinoids always meant a stronger effect,
Yeah.
but you're saying that's not always true.
Not always true.
Okay.
For instance, at low doses, a cannabinoid might actually increase CAMP,
Yeah.
leading to certain effects.
Okay.
But at higher doses, that same cannabinoid might start to decrease CAMP,
Oh, wow.
leading to totally different things happening.
So it's not just more equals stronger.
Right.
It's how the dose affects specific pathways, like the CAMP pathway.
Yeah, I got it.
And it's not just CAMP.
Yeah.
There's a bunch of other signaling pathways, too, that all have their own quirks
Okay.
and sensitivities to different doses.
My brain's starting to melt a little bit.
Oh, yeah.
Can you give me a concrete example
Okay.
of how this plays out?
Okay, let's take THC.
Okay.
The psychoactive component of cannabis.
Yeah.
It primarily activates those CB1 receptors
Right.
at low doses.
Yeah.
THC can increase dopamine release,
Yeah.
leading to those feelings of euphoria and reward.
Okay.
But at higher doses,
Uh-huh.
it can start to activate other pathways
Yeah.
and potentially lead to anxiety,
Well,
paranoia, or even memory impairment.
so same molecule, different doses.
Yeah.
Totally different effects.
Exactly.
That's kind of scary.
It is, and that's why understanding these dose-response relationships
Yeah.
is really important.
Especially if we're using them for treatment.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Especially for those therapeutic applications.
Yeah, because if you're trying to treat a medical condition with cannabinoids,
Right.
You need to know what dose is going to have the
Right.
effect you want.
You need that sweet spot.
Yeah.
And you don't want the side effects.
Right.
And that's why research in this area is so important.
Yeah.
We need to map out those dose-response curves for different cannabinoids, different people, and for different conditions to ensure that therapies are safe and effective.
Okay, so we talked about dosage and all these pathways,
Right.
but how does binding actually work?
That brings us to binding characteristics.
Okay.
You see, each cannabinoid has a unique shape
Okay.
and chemical properties that determine how it's going to interact with its receptor.
Got it.
Think of the receptor like a lock.
Okay.
And the cannabinoid is the key.
Got it.
So a perfect match is going to be a strong bind.
Yeah.
And a mismatched key is going to lead to weak or no binding at all.
So high affinity.
Yeah.
High potency.
Exactly. And that strength of binding is what we call affinity.
Okay.
A cannabinoid with a high affinity for CB1, for example, is going to bind really strongly and potentially trigger a really potent effect, even at low doses.
Yeah.
But it gets a little more complicated than that.
Okay.
Some cannabinoids act as what we call agonists.
Yeah.
Meaning they activate that receptor when they bind.
So they fit the lock and turn it.
Exactly. Fit the lock and turn it on.
Okay.
THC is a good example of a CB1 agonist.
Okay, so that triggers the stuff we were talking about.
Exactly. It triggers those downstream effects.
Okay.
But other cannabinoids act as what we call antagonists.
Okay.
They bind to the receptor, but they don't activate it.
Oh, okay. So they fit in the lock, but they don't turn it.
Yeah, they're like a blocker.
Okay.
CBD is kind of a weird one.
Okay.
It has this complex relationship with CB1.
Yeah.
It's not a direct antagonist, but it can actually change the effects of THC by messing with its binding.
Wow. So it's like this molecular dance floor.
It is.
With different cannabinoids.
Yeah.
Like competing for space.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
And understanding those interactions is so important for targeted therapies.
Right.
If we want to treat something specific, we need to know which cannabinoids to use, whether they're agonists or antagonists, and how their binding is going to change things at different doses.
Okay. It's all starting to come together now.
It is.
It's like all these pieces of the puzzle.
Right. The receptors.
Signaling pathways.
The binding characteristics.
And the dose response. All of it.
That's crazy.
It's all part of the big picture of how cannabinoids work in the body.
Okay. This has been really interesting.
Good.
But I feel like there's so much more to learn.
Well, there is.
Yeah.
That's what makes it so exciting.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's always more to learn.
Yeah, and it's so promising.
It is.
Like we spent all this time in the weeds talking about receptors and pathways.
Now I want to know how we can use this knowledge to help people.
Yeah. Well, it's an exciting area, but it's important to remember that this whole area of cannabinoid therapeutics is really still pretty young.
Okay.
We're just starting to get a handle on what's possible.
Okay, so what areas are showing the most promise?
Well, chronic pain is a big one.
Right.
Millions of people all over the world are dealing with chronic pain, and the usual treatments often just don't cut it, or they come with all these side effects.
I've heard so many stories about people finding relief from chronic pain with cannabis. But is there any science behind that?
Yeah, there's definitely more and more evidence that supports using cannabinoids for pain.
Okay.
Remember how we talked about CB1 receptors being concentrated in those areas of the brain involved in processing pain?
Yeah, so it's like they're intercepting those pain signals.
Exactly. They're right there in the way.
Okay.
And some cannabinoids, like THC, can really effectively activate those CB1 receptors, blocking those signals.
Wow.
And it's not just the brain.
Oh, okay.
They also seem to work in the spinal cord to block pain transmission.
So it's a two-pronged attack.
It is.
That's cool.
And it's not just THC.
Okay.
Other cannabinoids like CBD are also being looked at for pain relief.
Yeah.
But they probably work in different ways.
Okay.
CBD, for instance, might work by reducing inflammation, which often goes hand in hand with pain.
Right. Inflammation is like a huge part.
Yeah, it's everything.
Of so many conditions.
Yeah, you mentioned that CB2 receptors are mainly found in the immune system.
Right.
And they're involved in controlling inflammation.
Yeah. So can you tell me more about that?
Sure.
Like, how does that work?
Well, think of CB2 receptors as like the gatekeepers of the immune system when they get activated.
Yeah.
By certain cannabinoids, they can help regulate that immune response and reduce those pro-inflammatory molecules.
So it's like calming down the immune system.
It is. It's like telling it to chill out a bit.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah. This makes them a really attractive target for developing therapies for conditions like rheumatoid arthritis, inflammatory bowel disease, and multiple sclerosis, all of which involve chronic inflammation.
It's so cool that like one system,
it is.
The endocannabinoid system, can play a role in managing so many different things.
Yeah, it really highlights how connected everything is and how important that balance is.
Yeah, what about neurological disorders?
Yeah.
I've heard about CBD being used for epilepsy.
There is some promising research in that area.
Okay.
Some studies have shown that CBD can actually help reduce the number and severity of seizures in some types of epilepsy.
Like which ones?
Particularly Dravet syndrome and Lennox-Gastaut syndrome.
But how does that work?
Yeah.
Because epilepsy is about like abnormal electrical activity in the brain.
Right. And we're still figuring out exactly how it works.
Okay.
But it seems like CBD might be changing how neurotransmitters are released and making neurons less excitable.
So basically restoring balance.
Yeah, kind of like hitting the reset button.
Wow. So cannabinoids aren't just about pain.
Right.
They can also affect neurotransmitters.
They care.
In the brain.
Yeah, and that opens up a whole new world of possibilities.
Right.
Researchers are looking into them for things like Parkinson's disease,
wow,
Alzheimer's disease, and even Huntington's disease.
But this research is still early.
Very early. Yeah. It's important to remember that.
Okay, so it's exciting.
It is.
But I imagine there are some challenges too.
Yeah, definitely.
Like what are the biggest hurdles?
Well, one of the big ones is that some cannabinoids, like THC, are psychoactive.
Right.
Now, that can be good for some conditions, but it can also cause side effects.
Right.
Anxiety, paranoia, or problems with thinking clearly.
So it's like a double-edged sword.
Yeah.
The thing that makes it appealing recreationally can also be a problem medically.
Exactly.
Tough.
And that's why understanding dose response and receptor binding is so important.
Right.
We need to find that perfect balance.
Yeah.
The right cannabinoid at the right dose, delivered in the right way to get the benefits without the downsides.
That sounds like a tough job.
It is. And another challenge is how different people respond to cannabinoids.
Right.
Everyone processes these compounds differently, and their endocannabinoid systems might be totally unique.
Oh, wow.
So what works for one person might not work for another.
That's crazy.
Yeah. It might even have the opposite effect.
So it's like personalized medicine for cannabinoid.
It is.
Wow.
We need to figure out how to tailor these therapies to each person's needs and their own biology.
That's the future.
That's the goal.
Yeah.
And this field of pharmacogenetics is starting to give us some answers.
Okay.
In the future, we might even use genetic testing to predict how people will respond to different cannabinoids.
That's amazing.
Yeah, and that could pave the way for truly personalized treatment plans.
Yeah, so we're not just guessing anymore. It's like based on your actual genes.
Exactly.
So I know you said there are challenges in this area of research. What are some of the others?
Well, for a long time, cannabis has been a schedulized substance, which has made it really difficult to get funding and access to the plant for studies.
So the laws have been a big roadblock.
They have, but things are starting to change. As more places legalize cannabis for medical or recreational use, we're seeing more research.
Okay, that's good.
And more funding. Yeah. Which is great.
Hopefully that leads to more understanding
of the
endocannabinoid system.
Yeah, and its potential.
Okay, what else is going on in the research?
Well, one area that's really cool is developing new cannabinoid therapies that aren't just plant-derived.
So instead of just using what's in nature, we're making our own.
Exactly. Scientists are developing synthetic cannabinoids that target very specific receptors with more precision and power.
So it's like designing custom-made keys for those cannabinoid locks.
Exactly.
What are the advantages of that?
Well, you get more control over the structure and the properties of the molecule, allowing you to fine-tune the effects. And maybe even reduce side effects.
Oh, wow.
And they can be produced consistently.
In standardized formulations, which is really important for making reliable medications.
So it's like the difference between a herbal extract and a pharmaceutical drug.
Exactly.
Okay, what else is exciting?
Well, another area is developing new ways to deliver cannabinoids.
So like how we give those keys to those locks.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Because how a drug is administered can really affect how it works and its side effects.
Yeah.
Traditional methods like smoking or edibles can be kind of unpredictable and hard to control.
Okay.
But researchers are developing things like transdermal patches, inhalers, and even targeted nanoparticles that allow for really precise delivery.
So it's like getting the right dose to the right spot.
To the right spot at the right time.
It's crazy.
And these advances in delivery are really opening up new possibilities for cannabinoid treatments.
Oh, we might be able to get more effective treatments. With fewer side effects.
So we talked about all this cool stuff. But it's clear we're just getting started. What are some of the big questions that scientists are still trying to figure out?
Well, one thing is that we're still working on understanding the exact roles of the endocannabinoid system in all these different processes in the body. Like, how does it work with other systems? How is it involved in homeostasis? And how does it contribute to diseases?
So it's like we've found this new continent.
It is.
But we've only explored a little bit.
Yeah, we're just scratching the surface. As we explore more, we're going to learn even more about the power of this system and how it can improve people's health.
Wow. I can't wait to see what happens in this field.
Me too. It's really exciting.
It is.
There's so much potential here.
My brain is like fried after all that. It's amazing to think about.
It is.
All those tiny interactions happening and how we're just starting to understand them.
Yeah, it really is.
But before we go, let's bring it back to the listener's question. About dose response and receptor binding. Can you sum up the key takeaways?
Sure. The main thing to remember is that cannabinoids aren't simple. It's not just like cannabinoids do this or that. It's way more complicated. First, the type of cannabinoid matters. Different cannabinoids have different affinities for those CB1 and CB2 receptors.
So they bind with different strengths and have different effects.
Exactly.
Like THC is a strong activator of CB1. But CBD is more of a modulator.
Yeah, it's more complex.
And then there's the dosage.
The dose makes a huge difference.
Yeah, we talked about how low doses can increase CAN-MP, but high doses might decrease it.
Yeah, and that can lead to totally different things happening.
Even with the same molecule.
Exactly.
And then on top of that, everyone reacts to cannabinoids differently.
Yeah, everybody's different.
Based on their genes and their body and their experiences.
It's true.
So what works for one person might not work for another.
It might even do the opposite.
That's wild.
Yeah, but it shows why personalized medicine is so important.
Yeah, like finding the right treatment for each individual person.
Absolutely.
So cannabinoid therapeutics is still young.
It is.
With a lot we don't know.
Right.
But what are the implications for the future of medicine?
That's a big question.
Yeah, what should we be thinking about?
Well, now that you know how cannabinoids work on a molecular level, how the dose matters, and how individual factors play a role, think about what this means for healthcare. Could we design cannabinoid therapies based on someone's specific receptors or even their genes?
That'd be amazing.
Imagine predicting how someone will respond to a treatment and making sure it's as effective as possible.
Wow, that's a crazy future.
It is.
But it sounds possible.
It does. And the more we learn, the closer we get. And this knowledge gives us power. We can ask better questions, demand better research, and push for safe and effective treatments.
That makes sense.
It's not just about the science.
Yeah.
It's about using it to help people.
That's a great point.
And I really believe that the endocannabinoid system can change the way we think about health. But it's up to all of us, scientists, doctors, policymakers, everyone, to keep exploring this carefully and responsibly.
This has been a wild ride.
It has.
Through the world of cannabinoids. Keep learning, everyone, and stay curious.
That's the key.
There's so much more to discover.
There is.
And that's a wrap on today's Deep Dive.
Thanks for joining us.
Keep those brains buzzing until next time.